Hello, hello. How is everybody doing? Today is Wednesday, May 4th. It's 9 a.m. here on the West Coast. I know it's funny because Liz and I are totally on different time zones. So it's always funny when people in the comments and stuff are like, good afternoon. It's dinner time. And I'm always just like, oh, we just woke up over here. So welcome, welcome, welcome. If you joined us right now, this is Ask the Experts here on the International OCD Foundation every first and third Wednesday. Ask the Experts is hosted by myself and Liz McInville. Unfortunately, Liz McInville is feeling a little bit under the weather, so she's taking the day off. But that's the great thing about both of us co-hosting together. If one of us is sick or not feeling well, or traveling or anything else, the other one's got our back. So it's going to be just me today. I hope that's okay. I know we all miss Liz. She's an amazing personality, amazing, bubbly human being with a lot of knowledge, but I'm going to try to hold it down my best solo. So what Ask the Experts is all about is we had so many people constantly asking questions that we never got to. And one time Liz and I just didn't ask the experts to get to those questions. And we got such a positive response, and it continues to get a positive response. So this episode is all about you today. So what you're going to do is whatever social media platform you're on, in the comments, in the chat, you're going to ask a question or a comment or something about the community or something that you want to share to the IOCDF community. So if you have a question, please go ahead and ask it. I'm going to answer every question that I can for the hour. So make sure to put that in the chat. You can ask about anything OCD and related disorders related, and I will get to it. So a little bit about myself. My name is Chris Tronson. I had severe OCD. I was housebound, suicidal. I was at the lowest point in my life. And luckily, through the IOCDF, I found proper treatment. And because of the proper treatment that I received at the OCD Center of Los Angeles under Tom Corboy and Karen Pickett, I was able to get to a point where now I am living a full life. I was, a lowest point in my life, and now I'm at a place where I'm absolutely thriving. So I just want to always be living proof that you can get better. I decided to go full circle and become a clinician who specializes in the treatment of OCD and related disorders. So I was trained in that, got a master's of science degree, and I've been with the IOCF and an advocate as well, one of their lead advocates as well as a clinician. So I'm here to answer your questions from all different angles, whether it's from lived experience, clinical experience, or both. So like I said, Ask the Experts is all about you. So make sure you put those comments and those questions in the chat. Before we jump into all of that, I want to let everybody know that you can also submit pre-submitted questions. So I'm looking at the list right now. We already have some pre-submitted questions. So if you go to iocf.org/peace of mind, that's a place where you could put in any pre-questions that we make sure we get to. If you can't be on the stream live, or if you'd rather ask it there versus in the chat on your social media, please go there. Also, you can suggest different topics. So orthorexia, for instance, was something suggested, and we're going to be doing it at the end of this month. We also had false memory and real event OCD asked about, and we're going to do that with Patrick McGrath. This month, it's going to be Kim Quinlan with orthorexia at the end of the month, the fourth Wednesday. And then next month in June, the fourth Wednesday, I believe it's the 22nd, will be on false memory and real event OCD with Patrick McGrath from No OCD. So all of that comes from your suggestions, so please go there. But don't forget to put those comments in the chat. A couple announcements real quick. Remember that this live stream is educational and not intended to replace therapy. So for treatment-related questions, please work with your provider to contact a local clinician. You can always use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find help. To find help to locate a trained clinician near you. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. If you are in a crisis or you are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255. Lastly, we want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. At the end of the day, we're here to support each other. And note that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms, is being recorded. All right, everyone, I hope you join us, ask questions. Before we jump into questions, one of the things that I want to start off with is this past weekend on Saturday, April 30th, was the OCD Southern California virtual 6th annual conference. We are an official affiliate of this organization, the IOCDF, so thank you to the over 1,000 people that joined us. But the reason I'm bringing that up is one of the talks that I did with Kim Quinlan, who's going to be our guest at the end of the month, as well as Jessica Serber and Allegra Caston, was on shame and OCD. And a lot of people related to that talk. And so before we jump into questions, one of the things I also want to give people an opportunity to write in the chat is a little bit about your experience with shame and OCD. We always think of OCD with distressing emotions like anxiety and panic and distress, but we rarely talk about shame, guilt, embarrassment with OCD. And when it comes to shame, I really resonated with the topic because I think I felt a lot of shame around the OCD. I felt shame at the way I treated my mom and my sister because both of them were just trying to help. And because the OCD would get in my head and they would be sort of living with me and in my way of my compulsions, I snapped, I yelled, I threw things, slammed doors, broke things. And so that is so not my character. That's not who I am at my core. And I behaved in a way that was shameful and embarrassing and sad. Obviously, I don't blame myself at this point. I recognize it's from undiagnosed and untreated mental illness at the time, but I still held a lot of shame after treatment. I held a lot of shame because I would see my peers, people I went to high school with, people I started college with. Here I was, basically trapped at home doing compulsions all day, a complete shell of myself. And meanwhile, my friends are thriving and they're dating and they're traveling. And I felt shame and I felt behind and I felt that I wasn't as advanced as them, maybe not as smart as them, not as accomplished as them, and felt a lot of shame. But mainly, I felt shame because of my intrusive thoughts. One thing that I said this weekend is that having intrusive thoughts is one of the core components, one of the hallmark presentations of having OCD. Nobody has OCD without intrusive thoughts, whether it's about contamination, harming family members, sexual intrusive thoughts, your sexual orientation. I mean, all these different subtypes we coin and we talk about all come from intrusive thoughts. And what's difficult about this disorder is those intrusive thoughts aren't coming from another place, right? Like we aren't hearing a different voice telling us, to hurt our family or to punch a pregnant woman or kick a kid in the street or to hit somebody with your car. So you start to internalize that and think that you are having these thoughts. You want these thoughts. And that's why we're so desperate, whether it's the mental compulsions or the physical compulsions, to try to push these thoughts away or ruminate on them or prove that we'd never do that. And that brings a lot of shame. So when I had thoughts about hurting family members who I absolutely were protective of and loved and would do anything, I'd go to the ends of the earth to protect them. I'm super Greek, so I'm very protective of my family. I'm Greek and Norwegian, but my Greek side, for some reason, I don't know what it is, but there's something about family on that side. It's on both sides, but I would, fight dragons for my family, right? Like I absolutely love them. So of course, why wouldn't OCD pick on that? It knew I would get defensive and I would cry and I would avoid and I would beg and I would plead. And so I felt so much shame having those thoughts. And I really hated myself. And my internal dialogue started to become so negative because of that. And part of my recovery was realizing that I didn't ask for these thoughts and I certainly am no longer going to own them. This is a disorder providing unwanted thoughts in my head that cause me discomfort. And I want everything in the world to make them go away. And sadly, the only way to do that is to drop all of the ways that make me feel okay with having the thoughts. So if I prayed and I begged and I pleaded and I tried to prove to my head that I didn't want to hurt my family, my brain would reward me temporarily. And so I had to hold on to that. But it was learning in treatment that you got to let go of those compulsions. So I want to open up that chat as the questions pour in. Just what do you feel with shame and OCD, and how have you worked through that, or have you not worked through it yet? But I do want to always remind people that this is a disorder and you don't have to own your thoughts. So thank you so much to everybody that is here today. I see people in the chat like Dave. It's so good to see. Ashan, it's good to hear from you as well. Lee Ann, thank you so much. Let's start with the first question at 12:05 Eastern. What's the best way to deal with hit and run? I've been struggling with that. So Michael, I'm not sure where you're from, because one thing that I hear from a lot of people from other areas of the country is one of the things that they do is they stop driving. You can't really do that in California. I mean, for instance, where I live, if I tried to get somewhere that's a 20-minute drive, it could take 4 hours on a bus or public transportation. We just don't have great public transportation here in California. So one of the biggest things that people will do, some of the compulsions, the main ones are not driving. They'll drive with a passenger who can kind of reassure them they didn't hit somebody, or they'll only be a passenger. A lot of times it's driving with no music, gripping the steering wheel, constantly scanning, driving back around the block, looking in your rear view mirror, checking, to see if there's any news stories about somebody in your neighborhood being hit with a car. It's watching news or looking up articles. So all these different compulsions, like I said, make you feel safe and make you feel okay. But Michael, as you know, it makes you feel okay for a very, very short period of time. And then the next time you drive, the OCD has gotten a little bit of what it wants. So it keeps pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And next thing you know, it's so overwhelming that if you do drive, it can be an hour, 2 hour event because you're circling the block, you're frustrated, you're trying to replay in your head, did I hit somebody? You're scanning your car for dents, or you just don't drive. So what you want to do is you want to basically create like a driving hierarchy. So list all the different compulsions that you do, all the avoidances. So maybe it's only driving during the day, driving on the streets, driving in the middle lane so you're not near passengers. Like write down and just kind of dump everything that you either do or don't do because of your fears around driving. And what you're going to do is you're going to rank that sort of from easiest to hardest. And let's say the easiest for you would be to drive in the afternoon. Maybe you feel more comfortable driving during the day when the sun's the brightest and visibility is the brightest, but you're going to try driving at 5 in the afternoon when the sun is starting to go down and a little bit dark. So let's say that's the first thing you want to tackle. I like to think of OCD in kind of like 4 steps with a pre-step and a post-step. So the pre-step is this OCD? And you already answered that question. So the first step is we're going to really work on step 1 on taking opposite action. So if the OCD is demanding that you don't drive in the afternoon because visibility is slightly off compared to the day, you're going to defy the OCD and fight it and do the opposite. You're going to say, look, one of my values in my life is to be able to drive and to make choices out of preference and want versus fear. So I'm going to drive. I'm going to kind of set a plan to maybe drive about 25, 30 minutes in my area when the sun's down a little bit. So there's still visibility. It's not too hard, but it's good enough that I'm pushing back against the OCD. The second step is how do you handle it mentally? Because clearly OCD is going to get louder and throw a fit because you're defying it. So we're so tempted to either freak out, argue and debate with it, kind of ignore it or distract ourselves, or seek out reassurance or kind of self-soothe and self-calm. And unfortunately, all those 4 ways don't work. I always joke that OCD is like the Kardashians. It likes attention no matter what, even if it's bad attention, it just wants to be talked about. So those 4 ways that people give into the OCD mentally only just makes it worse. So what you're going to do, what we always talk about, here on the show, is we're going to absolutely learn to accept uncertainty. There's certain things rationally you can do to ensure that you're a safer driver. So clearly, don't be on your phone, or, don't drive with your eyes closed, or if the sun's coming down and you need sunglasses, great, do that. Those aren't compulsions. Those are things everybody else does. But really practice mentally to not create conflict, not to create tension and distress in your head. And to do that, we're going to sort of let OCD just kind of talk smack and say what it's going to say. So just like in real life, if we have somebody like a boss who's telling us something irrational, but we don't want to argue back because it just doesn't go anywhere, same with OCD. So as you're driving, you're taking that brave step, and OCD is like, you're going to hit someone. You hit someone. Did you hit someone? It's like, thanks for sharing. Great to hear. Interesting. I'm going to go back to driving now. It seems weird to not answer our thoughts because our relationship is to answer those, but we're going to try something different. We're going to practice. And I hope everybody, whatever subtype, is listening, because this is across the board, not just hit and run. But we're going to learn to not have conflict and just sort of own that thought and say, look, I'm going to take a more passive approach. Usually I'm active and I'm arguing and I'm fighting. Today, I'm just going to let you say what you have to say. I'm going to let you kind of be in the background. I'm going to kind of just hear you and hear what you have to, say, acknowledge your presence. But I'm not going to get into an argument. I'm going to accept the fact that if I drive, there is a possibility I could hit someone. I don't know how high it is. I don't know how low it is. And I'm not going to try to figure out. I'm going to spend my time and my energy focusing on driving. Third step in ERP, we want to make sure that we have response prevention. We can't do an E without the RP. So response prevention means to not do the compulsions that OCD is going to ask you to do if you take those brave steps in 1 and 2. So the third step would be to not do compulsions. So as you're driving, you're not circling the block. You're not asking for reassurance. You're not driving in a way that you wouldn't normally drive because of OCD. And by cutting out those compulsions, people think it's going to make them more anxious, but instead your brain sees you relax relaxed, not doing these frantic mental and physical compulsions. And it starts telling you that maybe there isn't as much danger in this situation as possible. And the last step is repeated and prolonged. So make this part of your everyday routine. Driving for 30 minutes from 5 to 5:30 when visibility isn't as sharp. You want to make sure you're going up that hierarchy until you are driving with freedom and not making choices around OCD. And the final step that I like to think about is processing. After do this for a few days, start to process, like, what are you learning by doing ERP? You're learning that you can drive and you aren't hitting people and you can live with uncertainty and you can live in your values. So I hope that helps you, Michael, and I hope that helps everybody else with OCD. So just replace hit and run with your subtype. So thank you so much. Erica asks, can you speak to common medication combinations for people with depression, OCD, and ADHD? So the first thing I'm going to ask is Skyla at the IOCDF to bookmark this question. So Erica, what we're going to do, Liz and I talked about, is we're going to invite a psychiatrist on the show, and we've kind of been storing medication questions so that we can directly answer those questions from a psychiatrist's point of view. So I'll try to give you as much common knowledge as I have, but I always remind people I'm not a psychiatrist and can't prescribe meds. But like I said, we're not going to forget your question. We're going to definitely get that at a later date with a psychiatrist. What I do want you to do is, hopefully Skyla can find this. I always just Google IOCDF medications. There's a really good medications article on the IOCDF website from Dr. Michael Janicki. He was the psychiatrist that started the McLean Institute at Harvard, the first residential, and he also has done a lot of research. So this article talks about the medications and the common dosage. What I will say is, the good thing is, when people have depression and OCD, the medications typically treat both. You do need to go on a higher dose, like this article states, when it comes to an SSRI. That's usually gold standard first-line treatment. So that would be like Prozac, for instance, Lexapro, Luvox. So typically you have to go on a higher dose. So they suggest in this article 60 to 80 milligrams of Prozac, for example, for OCD, where maybe somebody can do just 40 for depression. So the depression and OCD piece often is taken care of from the medication. The tricky thing about having OCD and ADHD is, for ADHD, the medications typically are going to be a stimulant. So that's like Ritalin or Adderall. And what some people find is, taking that medication, it increases symptoms of anxiety, and they start to feel like heart races and racing thoughts and racing experiences. And so then what happens is their OCD and anxiety gets worse. So the ADHD gets better, but the OCD and anxiety gets worse. So a couple things I've seen psychiatrists try, and once again, we're going to get a psychiatrist to answer this better, is they might do a lower dose of ADHD medicine so that they do still get some of the benefits without triggering that anxiety response, along with cutting out caffeine and other things that can elevate it. Or second, there's a medication called Strattera, and I think there's a few others that are non-stimulant medications that can be used for ADHD, so people tolerate them better with OCD. So hopefully that's enough knowledge to get you started. Skyla, when you find that article, if you can either pop it in the chat or pop it on the screen, and I hope you can access that, Erica. And then, like I said, we are bookmarking all of these questions on medication. We're going to do a big medication chat. So thank you so much. Carla, you submitted a question about benzodiazepines. Let me see if that one popped up. That's going to be another good question for the psychiatrist. Yes, sorry, we have a lot of really good questions. So I'm just trying to get through it real quick to find your question. What I'll say about benzodiazepines, and once again, we're going to get a psychiatrist, so I'm going to keep qualifying that. Benzodiazepines are typically going to be used for short periods of time, just to make sure if somebody's really struggling with intense anxiety, they might go on something like Klonopin. Typically, I don't see psychiatrists prescribing it for long term. And also, sometimes if people are taking benzodiazepines during treatment, they're not feeling the full experience of anxiety. So once they go off of it, some of their anxiety might skyrocket because they get off benzodiazepines, and then the OCD feels louder and harder. Let me know, Carla, in the chat if that answered your question. We got so many questions, so I can't find it. But I will definitely, if I find it, I'll answer it better, but maybe put it in the chat. like I said, that's definitely going to be a better one where a psychiatrist can go in real depth about benzodiazepines and the pros and the cons. So I promise you, I'm not dodging it. It's just they're going to answer it better. Just like I would answer a treatment question better than them. So we're going to bookmark that one too, Skyla, from Carla, but hopefully I answered a little bit of your question. All right. So another question we have at 12:07 is from Ashan Tariq. I wanted to ask that should an OCD patient avoid a cousin's marriage to avoid the illness genetically transferring to children? What if your parents are already first cousins? You know what? That question is definitely something that I don't really think that I'm going to answer it the way that I think you're asking it, and I'm hoping this is how you're asking it. Should you avoid getting married or having kids if you have OCD? That's how I'm going to take this question. I don't think you're asking me if people should marry their cousins, but I'm going to take it as, should people get married and have kids when you have OCD? Not going to lie to you. In the DSM, it says that if your parents are like a first, kind of like a first level family member, so a first cousin or like an aunt, an uncle, etc., has OCD, you're 10% more likely to have OCD. Now, if they showed symptoms as a child, the DSM says you're 40% chance more likely. So is there a chance that you could potentially pass on OCD genes, and your child having OCD? Absolutely. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm a very honest clinician, an honest person, just blunt, say it like it is and let people process it as they will. With that said, I am so hopeful that people don't use that to deter themselves from getting married and have kids. You are not a selfish human being if you decide to have children with the potential of that you may pass it on. First of all, I think Liz talked beautifully about it last year at the OCD SoCal keynote. I hope we can get that on the IOCF website, because I think you guys should all see her talk about that same stress and that same worry and hesitation. And she is so glad she moved forward and had children despite the fear of passing on OCD. The good thing is you'll be able to catch the signs and symptoms a lot sooner. You will be able to find resources and help. And, it's chronic, but it's not a disorder that we have to live with forever in a severe state. There's help and there's treatment out there, whether it's, obviously exposure response prevention or medication or the combination of both. So please, please, please don't please don't avoid altogether having children. I think that, a lot of people are hesitant of it, but remember, there's help and there's treatment out there, and, your child might not have it. Look, your child might get something else, so we'd never tell somebody with diabetes to not have a child. We'd never tell somebody with, heart murmurs to not have a child. So don't have special rules for us with OCD, like not having children. It's already depressing. So I did find the question from Carla. So it's, my 30-year-old son has struggled with OCD for years and is reluctant to get help. When he did finally reach out to an OCD, the therapist told him that since he was on a benzodiazepine, ERP would not work as well, and he should talk to a psychiatrist about getting off of that before doing ERP. I was discouraged for him and hit a brick wall when he finally reached out. Would you agree that benzodiazepines do interfere with ERP? Would this be the response most therapists if he reached out to someone else? So once again, Carla, I'm going to answer that in my scope of practice, and I strongly will make sure that we are we already started reaching out to the psychiatrist, so we just have to book a date. So we're going to do that for sure, either May or June. Hopefully May, but we're going to have all these questions and he's going to go in more depth. So please come back for that. But I will answer it the same way this clinician probably answered it, because we can answer this component. As a therapist, I do get nervous working with a client on benzodiazepines. Now, once again, I don't want to ever step in the way of a psychiatrist. So if there's a reason that they came together and decided this individual needs benzodiazepines, I am not going to step on that. Sometimes, though, somebody is on benzodiazepines from a psychiatrist that doesn't really know OCD, and they've been on it for 2 or 3 years. And the reason this therapist said that it will interfere with treatment is one of the components of ERP is we have to be able to sort of feel the rise in anxiety, learn to work through it, and have the natural experience of our anxiety dissipate. That's not the only thing that ERP does. There's inhibitory learning. There's living in your values, there's all these other components, but one of them is to start getting used to putting yourself in a difficult situation and noticing that the anxiety and intrusive thoughts aren't as loud. And so whether it's benzodiazepines or when I'm talking to a client that's using marijuana or drinking, the problem that's going to happen is if your anxiety is going down or you're not experiencing it because of one of these substances, not pairing benzodiazepines with substances, of course, sometimes people don't feel the true anxiety. And so they do ERP on benzodiazepines, are doing better, so they go off of it, and then they get hit with so much anxiety. So I wouldn't not work with a client that's on a benzodiazepine, but what I'd really want to do is make sure that that the psychiatrist and myself are communicating and having sort of a step down plan. And then if there were the psychiatrist that doesn't really understand OCD, I would definitely want to have them work with a psychiatrist that understands it. So I wouldn't reject it, but we typically don't want it for a long period of time. Because one thing about ERP is we're trying to teach the individual that they can regulate themselves and they can tolerate emotions and distress tolerance by really pushing through and fighting against something. So we definitely want to teach them that. And sometimes people say, well, they're on medication, is that hindering it? SSRIs are very different. It's not kind of numbing the anxiety out, it's just letting the serotonin work properly so people can have a better mental state when handling the treatment. But it's very different. So like I said, this is a psychiatrist question. I feel like I'm starting to get to that space, so hopefully that answered it. Hi Terry, hi Patricia, hi Dana. Thank you, Patricia, for speaking at OCD SoCal. I'm glad you went. Michelle Woodkin, who is a big supporter of the OCD community, we love you. Thank you so much. Yes, I remember you, Michael. So hi. It's good to see you again. You're going to the IOCF conference in July. I'll be promoting that at the end. I'm so excited to be back in person. Shout out to IOCF in Denver. YR at 1210 asks, hi, is there an option to diagnose myself with OCD? I'm asking about scales or something like that. I have the hypothesis that I'm a sufferer, but can't find an educated specialist in my country. So YR, there is a scale that clinicians use. It's gold standard. It was created by Wayne Goodman and his colleagues. And actually, Wayne Goodman has been on live streams with the IOCF before. It's known as the YBOCS, not YBOCS, but it's YBOCS. Stands for Yale Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale. The IOCF actually has a version of it on their website. So once again, Skyla, I'm having you do your job, extra work today. But hopefully Skyla can either put it in the chat or put it on the screen. But, I typically suggest that you do it with a clinician leading it. But look, if there's not a specialist in your country, sometimes that's just not an option. So there's two parts to the YBOCS. There is the severity scale where you can find out how severe your symptoms are. And then there's a checklist where you can check off if you have certain components of OCD. And if you score, I believe 7 and below is subclinical. So if you score 7 and below, you might have traits of OCD, but not enough to have a diagnosis. But higher than a 7, it could be mild or moderate, severe, or extreme. That's a good way to see that you have OCD. So I know the IOCF has a self-report measure on their website. So definitely go to that. And if you're noticing that you score high and you're checking a lot of those things in the checkbox, most likely you have OCD. So hopefully that can help. Hi, Nikki from Ireland. Costas is asking, when I go to bed, this is at 12:13, when I get ready to go to bed and turn the lights off, I can't sleep because thinking I must sleep. But when the lights are on and I'm not ready yet, that's when I fall asleep immediately. So you got to remember something. When we want to go to sleep, we want to be in our parasympathetic nervous system. So that's our relaxed system. That's when we're tired. That's when our stress hormones start to fall. That's when our body cools down and we're calm, right? The problem is when we're anxious and we're trying to force ourselves to go to sleep, we kick in our fight or flight, our sympathetic nervous system, and those hormones come up. Now, those are the same hormones that our body releases to wake us up in the morning. So our body is confused. It's like, but I want to go to bed, but I'm panicked about not going to bed. So now my anxiety's up and now I can't fall asleep. So the best thing that you can do is not try to fall asleep. Tell yourself, look, the pressure I'm putting to fall asleep is so extreme. I'm probably having rumination. If I don't sleep, I won't be good at work. I'll be tired. I'll be that. The problem is the more that you fear that, the harder it will be to go to bed. So what we want to do instead is take a different approach and say, look, For the next 3 or 4 nights, it's going to be bumpy. I'm not going to try to go to sleep. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get into bed like I normally do. I'm going to make sure I'm not using electronics right before or have a TV on, make sure the room is cool enough, and only use my bed for sleep. But I'm just going to try to relax. I'm going to try to lay there, close my eyes, maybe focus on my breathing. I personally suggest what I used when I could not sleep with OCD because my brain would race. I just used a sound machine and turned it loud enough that I couldn't really hear my thoughts, but wasn't too loud to keep me awake. So a sound machine or a guided meditation. And I'm going to just practice noticing my breath, slowing it down, and resting. And if I just lay here awake but closed eyes in a dark room for 8 hours, it's the best I can do. And I'm going to power up on caffeine the next day, but I'm not going to try to go to sleep. It's going to either happen or it won't happen. And maybe work will be not as good, or maybe I'll be moody the next day, or the anxiety will be worse, but there's nothing I can do about it. If I could do something about it, I'd do it by now. What typically clients will say is that they end up falling asleep. So I've even done this in session where I've made the office like sleep friendly, had them on my couch, and I'm like, I don't want you to go to sleep at all. I want you to just lay there, close your eyes, focus on your breathing. I'm going to play some water sounds, and I just want you to lay there and kind of focus on your breathing and close your eyes, but don't try to fall asleep. You don't have to. There's no reason to. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, they're out. And I always feel guilty waking them up, but it's to prove to them that they can. It's just that there's so much pressure you're putting on yourself. So hopefully that helps. Think for yourself at 1214 says, I struggle with allowing myself to feel regular negative emotions or everyday stressors. So these are emotions like sadness, anger, stress, etc., for the fear that OCD will hijack those human moments. How do you deal with that? So what you want to remember is, I always think about it. There's no such thing as like positive or negative emotion. There's comfortable and uncomfortable. And some of those emotions that you recognized, like sad, anger, stress, is uncomfortable. So the problem that happens is those emotions we can't get rid of. And that's not the point of ERP therapy. Our point is not to try to get rid of emotions. It's to change our experience with those emotions. So what you've got to remember is this too shall pass. Emotions are temporary experiences. So if it's my birthday and people are singing happy birthday to me and all my friends are out and we go out and we have a good time and I wake up to a bunch of happy birthday texts, I'm going to be in a high. I'm going to be so happy. I'm going to walk with like my chest up. I'm going to be like, it's my birthday. You can't tell me nothing. I'm going to want to like go get ice cream, all that, right? But I know it's going to pass. I know I'm not going to be like 7 weeks later, like it was my birthday 7 weeks ago. Yeah, right. So I know good emotions will pass. We fear that negative emotions won't pass. And that's part of the reason for our compulsions is the OCD says, if you don't get rid of this emotion or ignore it or not deal with it, then you're going to be miserable forever. Well, how come good emotions pass, but bad don't? Does that sound rational, or does it sound a little bit like OCD is trying to con us? So what I remind people is be observant of your emotions. Recognize like, hey, I'm feeling distress. I'm feeling a heartbeat race. I'm feeling a dry throat. I'm feeling distress. I know it's OCD. I don't have any reason to be distressed. The OCD is kind of just conning me into it, but I'm changing my relationship with my feelings. I'm going to be an objective observer who notices it, but choose to engage in what I was engaged with anyway. So if I'm at the movies with my friend, I'm going to practice some mindfulness techniques. I'm going to focus outward, notice the screen, notice my environment, and engage in the film with such attention that I recognize that that's more important. I don't need to do anything about my emotion. My body will release it on its own, but I cannot push it. What you resist persists, think for yourself. And so what happens is if you end up trying to ignore these emotions or push them away, all it's going to do is make you more attuned to them. You're going to be more frustrated and distressed by them. And next thing you know, they are going to absolutely encapsulate your every good day emotions. Jalen at 1214 says, I feel shame when people hear me whisper my compulsions to myself. When I see people staring at me on the train, I pretend to be singing to myself. That's what's hard about having OCD is it can be so severe that we do compulsions in public. And then it's really, really difficult because we do start to feel embarrassed, right? Like we feel horrible that people are staring or laughing or pointing. So hang in there. I don't have any suggestions except, of course, to work into treatment and work on cutting the compulsion. But that's not really what you're asking, right? Like you're just wanting to feel heard. So I want you to know, Jalen, you feel heard. I used to wash my money in the bathroom at a grocery store to wash off contaminants because I didn't want to hand the money dirty and then the checker would like touch my stuff. And So I had to be embarrassed that I'm like handing wet money to somebody. They always ask me why it was wet and had to make that up an excuse. So just know that you're not alone. And as you get better, you'll be able to prevent yourself from giving into compulsions often. So hopefully that helps. Maria at 1217 asks, how do you handle existential thoughts or fear of suicidal thoughts? So existentialism or suicide, right? Like those are common experiences with intrusive thoughts. And we know that ego dystonic thoughts happen with OCD. And what that means is these are thoughts against our passions. So individuals that have thoughts about suicide, it's very different than somebody who's depressed. I attempted suicide, was suicidal and depressed. My thoughts didn't cause me distress. They caused me a way out. I felt like I could finally end my life, end the suffering, which I'm so glad. Obviously, I was rushed to a hospital and everything, but I do want you to say there's a difference. When you have suicidal thoughts but want to carry it out, it's a feeling of peace, which I know that sounds weird to say, but I felt finally like I had my solution, my way out from these constant barrage of intrusive thoughts. When we have intrusive thoughts that are suicidal based, or let's say existential, about kind of just our own mortality and about death and what happens after death, is what I'm presuming you're talking about when you say existential thoughts, because there's so many different types. It's ego dystonic. It's not what you want. You value life, you value connection, you value being here. Sure, sometimes for those who see life is hard. You don't want to end it. You just want it to go away, but you don't want to take your life. A lot of times my clients that have intrusive suicidal thoughts are some of the happiest clients. They're like, I just got married and I have a kid and I'm so happy and I got a job. But that's what OCD does, right? It attacks us in a way that we get so distressed and so, like overwhelmed and bothered by it that we fight it and we argue. If somebody really is suicidal, like with depression, they're not going to argue the suicidal thoughts. They may not want to do it because they don't want to hurt their family, but they're not going to argue. They have those thoughts because that's how they're feeling. With these thoughts, it's the opposite. So the way you handle them, Maria, is you recognize that your reaction to them is keeping them alive. They love attention. So the more you freak out, the more that you ask for reassurance, the more you Google things, look things up, avoid, the more you get rid of things in the house that you could potentially hurt yourself, the more you get rid of movies or not watch shows that have, themes in it of suicide, the worse it gets. So if you're getting these intrusive thoughts, the E in exposure is to bring those thoughts on yourself. So maybe a small exposure to start would be to watch a TV show that deals with suicide, but maybe a show and not like a true story. And what you're going to do is your anxiety and your intrusive thoughts are going to be elevated by watching the show. I like to think of values-based exposure. So pick a show you've always wanted to see or enjoy and just have been avoiding because of this theme. Once you see this, you're going to want to do compulsions, right? Like you're going to so badly want to do, real quick, just as a side note, on the back end, I heard that the YBox link is showing page not found. So the IOCF is going to fix it. But if you Google YBox, that's Y-BOCS PDF, it will pop up. But they're going to work on it on the IOCF site. Okay, so let's say you're watching that show and those thoughts about suicide pop up. Your compulsion is going to want to take over, right? Let's say it's a mental compulsion. So that's going to be wanting to convince yourself you'd never do it. It could be replacing with good thoughts or thinking happy things. Or let's say it's a physical compulsion, like turning the show off and playing a happy show. That is actually going to make you feel worse. You'll feel temporarily better, but your brain is going to say, wait a second, if Maria is doing that, it must mean because there's something really there. We got to be on the lookout for suicide. I'm going to keep bringing up these suicide thoughts to make sure she knows that they're there and so that she can reassure her brain that everything's okay. Now you're in the OCD cycle and you're stuck. You don't have to sit there and go like, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. I want to die. I want to die. That's not, you don't have to be extreme like that in ERP. But when those thoughts and those emotions come up, what you can say to yourself is, look, I hear you, OCD, and I know what you're trying to get me to do. You want me to take an active approach and spend the rest of my day doing something because I had these thoughts. What if I just do nothing? What if I just simply say, look, I just had an intrusive thought. It could be real. It could be false. It could be kind of true. It could be not true. I don't know. That's not my job anymore to discover the origin of it or why or question it. So I can't stop the thought, but I have a choice where I direct my attention. So I'm going to live in that uncertainty by not answering it because OCD is trying to con me to think that if I don't answer it, something bad will happen. I'm going to call its bluff and play chicken. I was on the way out grocery shopping, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to finish the episode and then go grocery shopping. I'm going to still have that nagging feeling in the thoughts, but it doesn't physically prevent me from doing what I want to do. And if I engage in it, if I do it till I become it, I'm pretty convinced after doing ERP for a while that I'll be in the store, I'll be trying to find the lima beans and I can't find them. And then I'm going to think, wait, that's been like 20 seconds. I didn't even have that intrusive thought or focus on it. So it's not the presence of the intrusive thought that's the bad thing. It's how much attention we give it. So just like a loud, annoying neighbor that makes too much noise, we can either sit outside and stare at the house and be frustrated and agitated, or we can close our windows, close our doors, and focus on something else. Still be bothered by the sound, but not let it take over. All right, so another question is at 12:17. It's Michael Williams, who says they live in the UK and they stopped driving because they started feeling responsible even when someone else was driving. And then up until today, same fears when I'm walking. I feel responsible for like knocking someone over on the road. It can take me a couple hours to get home, more than 15, 20 minutes. Once I start checking, I can't stop. This is a great point for all subtypes. Once you start doing it, the compulsion, you can't stop. Don't let yourself believe the cardinal OCD lie. Just do it once. Just do a few compulsions. Just compulse for 10 minutes. Just compulse for a little bit. That is a blatant lie from the OCD. Don't fall for it. Please do not fall for it. Once you give into that first compulsion, we like to complete things with OCD, and we're going to keep going and going and going and going. And it is hard to pull ourselves out. So if you can prevent yourself from giving into that first compulsion, then you're going to be better. So let's say you are walking across from somebody. I think I'm trying to read the message correctly. Let's say you're walking across someone and you're fearing that you're going to like knock someone over. So you do compulsion. Maybe you walk on the other side of the road, or you stop, or, whatever you do. If you do that once, the OCD is going to say, well, why not for that person? Well, that person's walking by you. You just drove by that car. You're going to keep going and going. If in that moment you're like, I'm going to walk forward, I'm going to keep going, and either I'm going to push that person or not, I don't know, but I'm not going to change the way I walk by people. If you make that first step to do it without a compulsion, then what ends up happening is you absolutely will notice it is easier to not give in. All right, we got a question from Lee Ann at 12:18. Question, can you briefly explain what an exposure to germs might look like? What kind of things might patients have to touch, and how is this safe in the light of the pandemic? Thanks. Okay, so let's say, I would say people with germ compulsions, it's not always around the pandemic. But what I like to do first, as like the easiest way to address germs, is I like to figure out what a client is doing because of their fear of germs. So is this taking an hour shower? Is this washing their hands for a minute 30 times a day? Is this washing clothes 2 times instead of once? Is this putting down a towel on every chair they sit? So the reason I ask clients to kind of open up about this stuff is because that is not pandemic behavior. Nobody's doing that anymore. I will agree that we were all a little bit intense at the very beginning and doing stuff that we don't do. Nobody without OCD is wiping down their groceries anymore. That was in the beginning, we didn't know what was going on. I want to remind people that when HIV and AIDS was first spreading, people weren't sharing pools, they weren't sharing faucets and water fountains. We look at that now and kind of laugh, but back then they didn't know. 2 years ago, we didn't know, so we're doing things like that. So what I would ask a client to do is say, look, like, where are you getting your info at? Who's telling you that because of the pandemic, or even if it's not a pandemic, germs, you have to take a 2-hour shower? Who's telling you that? The OCD. Well, the OCD has no basis in science. It doesn't have a degree. It's simply designed to have us keep going and going and overdo everything. So the first thing I'm going to do is just try to get some behavior back to normal. So, okay, you can still take a 10-minute shower in a pandemic. You can still wash your hands. Maybe you're out all day, you're at a mall, you're touching things. You can use a little sanitizer before getting in your car, but you can use a small pump, quickly rub and get going. The things that people are doing for the pandemic based on like CDC guidelines, et cetera, isn't anymore like ruining their life. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's say you decide to wash your hands before eating. Like, I never washed my hands before eating, except when I had severe OCD. I did do that during the pandemic a little bit, especially when eating out and I was touching things. But once again, it didn't cause me to stress. It was a quick 10 15-second hand wash. I know you're supposed to do 20, but I feel like that's overkill. And then I would go and eat, so it wasn't this big disruption. So what you want to do is recognize what is all the behavior that you alone are doing and none of your family and friends without OCD are doing. And if they're just fine, how come you have to live by a special set of rules? Now, I'm not going to have a client, not that I ever had clients like lick door handles, but I'm not going to have a client like rub a door handle and lick their hand, and things like that, just in a pandemic. But I don't think that we have to be so cautious. I do believe that we can go back to living as if, you don't have OCD. So sometimes you don't want to do this compulsively, but sometimes it's good to check in with people that you do trust that take the pandemic seriously and just see how they're behaving and aiming to get your stuff to that. I see a lot of people talking about shame and a lot of anger. So I'm glad that people can relate. OCD can bring on a lot of intense emotion. At 12:21, Skyla, can you bookmark Michael's question? Once again, it's about medication. So today it's telling me we got to get on this psychiatrist to come on. We got to make sure that we do it. Erica talks about with shame, like lashing out, because a lot of times anger is a secondary emotion. So, sometimes the reason that we lash out in anger with OCD is because we're so frustrated and agitated about our situation that we lash out because it's our only emotion we know how to express in that moment. And it gets us to kind of like push back against the disorder. And so I think a lot of people really, focus on anger. I was angry at everybody and everything when I had OCD severe because I didn't have proper treatment and help. I also ask that family members and loved ones watching this, like, have understanding. It's not okay to hit and throw things, but your loved one is going to be angry sometimes, and they're going to be quick to anger because they're keeping it together by a thread. So sometimes it's a little bit of understanding from loved ones and not dismissing somebody with OCD because they're angry. There's a lot of times that we just are angry. So it's okay sometimes, to be able to, to absolutely, excuse some behavior and have a talk later when the person is calm and just say, hey, earlier you said some things I didn't really like, and I understand because you're angry. What can we do differently? Grace says that she was a guest on A Penny for Your Intrusive Thoughts, and they talked about suicide, OCD, recommending checking out. Absolutely. We love A Penny for Your Intrusive Thoughts. I know that they're on Facebook and they're on Instagram. So at A Penny for Your Intrusive Thoughts, and Grace was a guest on Suicide OCD. So hopefully that helps. And yes, Grace, we're going to get that Y box up. Ronnie asks at 12:36, can you let me know if someone with scrupulosity who starts to believe that some of their intrusive thoughts may be inspirations from God to guide them? Would it be OCD or could it be psychotic? So Ronnie, the first thing I'm going to strongly suggest is on May 9th, you are at the Faith and OCD conference. There was a preview of that conference at OCD SoCal's conference, and I've heard nothing but good things from Katie O'Dunn's talk with Justin. Oh my God, I know Justin Hughes and some other panelists, but they're doing a big conference on that. They gave a preview, but the big conference is May 9th. Please sign up. I think it's something like $10. It's super affordable. And that whole talk is going to be on things like that. What I will say is that the difference between OCD and psychosis is somebody in psychosis doesn't recognize that they have psychosis. Like they truly 100% with little to no room for budging, believe their thoughts. So if a client genuinely believes that God is talking to them, that they have a direct connection with God, that they, God whispers to them, tells them what to do, and they're sitting with an OCD therapist and they're like, I shouldn't be here. My family tells me to be here, but I need an exorcism. I need God to I don't want God to get out of my head. Things like that. That may be psychosis, and that's going to be working with a psychiatrist to get on an antipsychotic, as well as working with somebody who specializes in treating that. But if somebody comes in and is like, I have these thoughts, and at first I thought they're OCD, and I've been giving into them for years, and now I'm thinking it could be God, I'm not sure. That's when we see that doubt, and that even if it's slight and they have a little bit of understanding that this potentially could be OCD, it may just be severe scrupulosity. So I would say getting an assessment with an OCD specialist, doing the Y box, having that conversation with a psychiatrist, getting on some medication and treatment. And if you notice that those thoughts start to decrease and your insight rises, it's OCD. If you get on the medication, you're seeing an OCD therapist and you're just not willing to budge, I would say it could be psychosis. But the fact that you're on here and you're watching an OCD live stream and asking the questions is gonna make me think that you know it's OCD. All right, Alice Roberts says at 12:37, I want to start dating and be more social again, but I'm reluctant and anxious because of my OCD. Alice, thank you for this question. You know, the whole reason when you hear somebody talk about ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, or better often said as ACT, when people ask this question, when we talk about ACT, the idea behind it is we cannot let fear, OCD, anxiety make our decisions anymore. And so by not dating and seeing friends, we're letting that fear make our decision. But if we live into our values and you say, a value of mine is to date, a goal of mine is to have friends, I'm going to do that. I don't know how it's going to look. I know it's going to be tough and I know it's going to be hard, but I'm going to live into my values. That is when we make decisions in treatment to work towards getting better because we have a reason to get better for. So, Alice, it is okay if you're not ready to date tomorrow, or if you're hesitant to jump into a big friend group. Please, there is no rush. But by having a goal, by having that thing out there, that why to do treatment, you're going to be more likely to fight harder in ERP. So I wanted those things. I was tired of being single and no friends when I had OCD severely. And knowing I could get friends again and I could date really made sure that I did my ERP and did my work. Then what starts to happen is on those hard days or those lack of motivation days, you can remind yourself why you're setting out to do that. So absolutely, Alice, make sure that you get engaged in that. Now, with dating, you can date casually without committing to someone until you feel like the OCD is managed. Or maybe with friends, you take one class. Let's say you take a martial arts class and you start to make friends slowly there versus jumping into a party or to a cruise or something intense like that. Lastly, what I would say is sometimes people worry that people might laugh at them or judge them. I think that sometimes by opening up to people that you have OCD, you're going to see their true character. You're going to see those people that are understanding and supportive and caring and want to talk to you about it and want to be there for you and want to help you and be supportive. And now you know you have a good friend. If someone is like laughs at you or is like, okay, don't talk to me about that, that's weird, or starts whispers or doesn't want to be your friend, that is a good sign early that they're not the person for you. And be open. If your compulsions make you late, if it make you leave early and you're working on that with a therapist, own it with your friends and just say, look, sometimes I get anxious. If you don't want to open up about OCD, or hey, I have OCD and need to leave a little early, and have some understanding why you're doing it. But I'm so glad I re-engaged in that because it changed my life and made me motivated to do treatment because I wanted to be with friends. I'm a social person. As you can see, I talk too much. So I needed that socialization for sure. All right. I'm not going to read this, but Grace just said that if you can go to the comments, go to 1240 and read Grace's comment. It's a really good one. It's just long, so I know it won't fit on the screen, but she talks a lot about harm OCD and how she helped fight back against that. So please read her comment. It's a really good one. Erica says, I have OCD with this, a major depressive disorder, and it's truly a battle, but I can always recognize when my suicide thoughts are OCD related. Yeah, I mean, somebody that has both can tell you they're very different, right? So, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Erica, for sure. And Grace did find the Y box if you signed PDF. So that's really, if you search it with PDF. So that's good to hear. All right. Yeah, so Leanne I was talking to you earlier, Leanne, about compulsions. So washing clothes twice, washing packaging, not eating open exposed food, sharing dishes, things like that. Don't let anyone near you. I would say like that is OCD like extra behaviors. So an example is what you could work up to is washing your clothes just once, and trusting that that's good enough. Not wiping down food packaging, maybe washing your hands before you put the food in your mouth, but not washing the packaging. Eating food that's exposed. Sharing dishes can be a personal thing. Oh, sharing dishes. I thought you meant sharing food. I was like, I don't like to share food because some people eat my food. But yeah, I mean, people use my dishes all the time because you wash them. So don't let OCD have you have these extra levels of barriers because it's not letting you live your full life. PV says, wash your hands before eating. I know, you know what I think it was, PV? I think it was because for so long, I would have to wash my hands for hours. I mean, my hands, there was a picture I shared at the OCD keynote last year at OCD SoCal. My hands were like bleeding and red and rashy. So I think because I overwashed my hands for so long, I kind of overdid it the opposite way for a while and just didn't care anymore. But I am better about washing my hands before eating. But it doesn't cause distress, and that's the difference. You can wash your hands before eating versus, numbing yourself out. Or numbing your hands out and like burning them off. So I got scolded by PV, but PV is kind of right. Real quick, I just want to say Grace said a quote from Ethan, which I love. What have I lost to OCD? Sometimes it is good to check in, not in a shameful way, not going to put yourself down. You're not going to be harsh to yourself, but sometimes it's good to check in and just say, hey, what is OCD taking away from me? And do I want it back? And am I willing to fight? Beth also talks about how the pandemic has negatively impacted. Yeah, I mean, the pandemic has definitely had a lot of people struggle. So that's definitely something that, when we get into a certain type of behavior with OCD, it's hard to bounce out against it. So definitely make sure that you are, fighting back against that. Aditya Adi at 1252 says, I'm from India and have OCD for the last 2 years. I started doing ERP for my compulsions. Now, when I look for ERP and read anything new, I start ruminating about it. So example, like breathing, swallowing, or staring. So what does sometimes happen is when people are doing a lot of research on different OCD subtypes, sometimes going to an OCD support group. This is not common. It can be rare, but people sometimes do start ruminating about other subtypes. So the good thing is to do the opposite behavior, right? So if you're reading about, it sounds like you're reading about, somatic OCD and you're, breathing and swallowing and staring. What OCD is telling you in that moment is to focus. If you don't focus, you'll be distressed. Or it may do something else because it affects people differently. It may be that you're noticing your breathing and it's causing you distress. Here's what I would do. Let's say if I notice my breathing, it causes me distress. What I would do is I'd put on a meditation that has you focus on breathing. I'd put my hand kind of on my chest and I would deliberately notice my breathing. And when I'd feel that panic start to rise, like, what if I notice it forever? I would say, I may. I mean, you might notice it forever. So how are you going to cope with that? How are you going to still live an effective life when noticing your breathing forever? Because if OCD is blackmailing you and causing you to feel distress and pain and panic, then sure, you're absolutely going to freak out about it and focus on it even more. But if you have a kind of like, well, I don't care kind of attitude, like, I guess I'm going to focus on my breathing forever. And maybe my life's going to be 82% as good as it would have been if I didn't focus on my breathing every day. And you set aside time to deliberately focus on your breathing. And then you focus on your breathing while trying to do other activities on purpose. What happens is you take the distress away, the panic, the fear, the terror. And then you just start noticing that you're focusing on breathing. And it's kind of annoying. But we can handle annoying. Terror is hard. And we get to a point where pretty soon, when our breathing comes up, it's not as interesting. Gandex saw on my social media that I met Bob Odenkirk from Better Call Saul. Absolutely, I met him. He was an awesome guy. And I asked him, because if you watch the show, he has those kind of like cheesy late night commercials in the show. And so I asked him if he remembers any, and he was talking about that. So it was fun little connection with him. So think for yourself. Oh, I just noticed the time. Think for yourself talked about shame and OCD. Anyone experience OCD with friends? Like intrusive thoughts about liking your friends must mean you're romantically into them. Absolutely. I mean, that's common, right? Like our intrusive thoughts start to, do I like this person? Do I not like this person? It can have us have intrusive thoughts about friends and people. And once again, in this case, the OCD is going to want you to do mental compulsions and try to figure out if you do like them or if you don't. When somebody likes somebody, the feelings come up organically. With OCD, we want to pull them up and analyze them. So what I tell people is don't try to discover the answer. That is an action, right? The intrusive thought that I might like a friend, can't control that. Have OCD, hands down, that's going to come up without me wanting it to come up. But what I can decide to do is, am I going to spend the next 3 hours trying to figure out? Am I going to go and hang out with them and then scan my groin or scan my heart rate or contemplate like kissing them? Do I like them? All of that is choices, that attention, that focus, that time in my head. If I'm spending 7 hours thinking about it, that's because I'm choosing. I can't stop the intrusive thoughts, but I can stop my relationship, my reaction, and my attention to it. So engaging outward and letting OCD live in the back of your head and say what it's going to say without spending time on it is key. All right, so what I'm going to do, Skyla, any of the questions that I missed. So Erica just asked a really good question. Bettina asked a really good question. Manjula just asked a good question. So if you could bookmark those. So for Erica, Bettina, and Manjula, I hope you come back in 2 weeks. Also, to those of you who asked pre-submitted questions, the reason I didn't get to a lot of them today is because it's so hard for me to do both. I'm so sorry. When Liz is here, it's so much easier because she can like read the question, or I can read the question and the other person answers. I think it was just tricky for me, and I'm so bad at doing two things at once. Like I can't text and talk, or I'll start talking or texting when I talk. So all the pre-submitted questions, which you had a good amount, we're going to bookmark the ones for medication, find a psychiatrist to answer those. So please, we'll announce that. The questions that people just asked at the end, we're bookmarking that. So come back, we'll make them a priority to answer those first in 2 weeks. Remember, next Wednesday is going to be Research Roundtable with Dr. Bromowitz and Kyle King. So Liz and I won't be there, but we'll be back the third Wednesday of this month. So that, I'm so bad in math, but that would technically be in 2 weeks, which would be 14 days, which would be 14 plus 4 is 18. So I think it's Wednesday the 18th. Skyla, yell at me if I'm wrong, but we'll be back. Liz and I am hoping she's feeling better, and we'll get to the more pre-submitted. It's just so much easier for me if I have somebody with me. Hopefully everybody whose question I didn't get to isn't mad. That's like my panic. I never want to not answer a question because I know you guys are all out there really trying to fight this horrid disorder, and I made it my mission to help. But I promise you, Skyla is so good at getting those questions down. I can actually see the doc and she's putting them there. So I promise to those 3 people that I mentioned, we will get to those questions first. And Skyla and Grace did say it's the 18th. So a couple quick announcements, and then I want to say goodbye to everybody. Don't forget that Ethan Smith is going to be back for Community Conversations, and that's next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern or 4 p.m. my time, West Coast. So you can ask questions live or submit them to iocdf.org/peace of mind. Oh, the Research Roundtable is actually moved to Thursday, May 19th. So I have to find out on our end, does that mean we're doing it live or we're not doing a live? So we'll definitely check to the IOCF social media. Go to maybe Skyla can let me know in the chat. But it looks like the Research Roundtable is going to be moved to Thursday the 19th. Not sure why, but it is. Don't forget that the 27th Annual OCD Conference is taking place in Denver this July. It's a special event for the entire OCD and related disorders community. That could be people with it, family members, loved ones, supporters, therapists, researchers. So go to iocdf.org/OCDCon. And then Katie O'Dunn, who's a good friend of mine, she is, and Val Andrews, Valerie, who's also lead advocate with myself, they are working hard to make sure that May 9th, the Faith and OCD Conference is amazing. So go to iocdf.org/faith conference to look at that and sign up for that low-cost event. And then don't forget to sign up for an walk. An OCD walk is this June and October. So OCD Southern California, we're having 4 walks, one in Inland Empire, one in Los Angeles, one in Orange County, and one in San Diego. And those are June 4th for OCD SoCal. But go to iocdf.org/walk. It's going to be a community advocacy and fun day. And it's going to be so good to see people back in person. All right, so everybody, yes, Grace, the conference is back in person. Can't wait. So thank you, everybody who joined today. Like I said, this show would be nothing. It would just be Liz and I staring at each other if it wasn't for you joining us every Wednesday, asking questions, submitting topics, opening up, sharing, talking to people in the chat and community. So you're all incredible. Thank you so much for coming. You mean the world to me. I look forward to this every Wednesday. I feel like I'm hanging out with my community. So I really appreciate everybody that asked a question and commented or just watch. That's so important to me. Liz, feel better. She'll be back with me in 2 weeks. And yeah, the 18th, make sure to join us back. We'll get to the rest of the questions. Also, like I said, we'll get a psychiatrist on the show, and make sure to join us for the 4th Wednesday for a discussion about orthorexia with the great Kim Quinlan. Make sure to go to iocf.org for everything OCD community, resource, and education. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, as somebody that went from housebound and hospitalization and suicide to somebody that is treating OCD as a therapist and living a super good life and just family and friends and all those things we look for, you can get better. I'm not wealthy. I'm not special. Therapy didn't even happen by my house. It was a 4-hour round trip, but I'm just somebody that did the work, and that's how I got better. So there's treatment out there. There's help out there. Go to isdf.org for more. Everybody have a great rest of your day. It's always good to hang out with you. And remember, you are bigger, better, and stronger than the OCD. Thank you so much and take care. Have a great rest of your day.